Morning, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Sorry we're starting a couple of minutes late. Welcome to the Committee Model Review Group. There's no scheduled fire alarms for today. If we hear a continuous ringing bell, we'll head out through, I'm guessing, through the main doors. And out through the main doors of the Council House itself and down the ramp to, City Hall's still not caught on, towards the library until we know it's safe to come back in. Apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Heather Mack, who's being substituted by Councillor Lisa Stone. Do we have any declarations of interest? Terrific. Thank you very much. We'll move on speedily to public forum. Oh, did I miss minutes? Yeah. Apologies. Minutes of the previous meeting. Any matters arriving from the minutes of the previous meeting? Any questions pertaining to the accuracy or comments on the accuracy? Fantastic. I'll propose those. Do we need to formally propose in second? Yeah. Councillor Eddy seconds. Thank you very much. Which does bring us to public forum. We will start with a personal note from me. These very largely were questions about questions, and apologies. One of the things that has been coming up and has been raised with this working group on a few occasions is, are we getting the balance right in terms of the time it takes to get from the papers being published to allow the public time to digest them, comment on them, formulate questions, and then to enable officers to draft responses and councillors and elected members to then write their answers and get them to the public and the members of the committee in good time for the meeting. I would say the public has done a phenomenal job of stress testing that system. So apologies, the answers available reflect my thinking at 2 o'clock this morning, which is when I finished doing these. I suppose what I'm saying is, please be gentle with me. Some of these reflect advice that was given in haste and not in writing, and as best we could. So I'll do my best to give you the best answers to the questions, and apologies to those who've had items or elements of their questions redacted. As I say, I'll try and give a fuller verbal reasoning for that as we go through, if it's necessary, or in writing after the meeting, if that's more appropriate. So we had question PQ1 from Suzanne Audrey. You've seen the answers, I take it, probably just now. Supplementary?
Just to say thank you, first of all, because this is the 4th meeting at which I've asked this question, and this is the closest I've actually got to an answer, so I'm grateful for that, and I appreciate it's coming late. Just to point out, though, that I asked for defamatory, and you've given me a definition of vexatious. So, I suppose my question is, I think this needs a bit of tightening up, because when you try to ask questions or make statements, that it flashes up that you can be rejected or redacted, and it's a decision by the council, and they don't necessarily have to tell you why. And I just wonder, is there a plan to improve this and make that a little bit clearer to the public?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that will be really critical to the work of this group moving forwards. Public forum is one of the, I'd say there are 2 or 3 things when approaching this committee model review that have come up again and again and again, and the way that we do public forum is one of them. It came up again last night in respective training that members were being given by an independent organisation around how our planning committees and DC systems work. And in fact, I think it was the first thing the Deputy Leader of Council raised with me in respect to this committee was the need to provide more clarity to the public on what, I forget chapter and verse, I want to say CPR 9.5? Yeah, that's the one. How that's worded, and do those words actually do the job that they need to do, whilst actually, I think if you take those words, as most people would, I would find those quite insulting, to be fair, if something of mine was rejected on one of those bases, if I didn't know what they were supposed to cover. And I think we need to provide that clarity forthwith, but we also need to look as a council at how we do this process, and is this actually the best way of doing it in terms of accountability and making sure accountability sits where should best? Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that is helpful. I will give you defamation in writing. Alas, it's been too long. Yeah, malicious and injurious without reasonable basis in fact with the defence of truth. Something like that, but I'll get you something proper. Thanks. Question PQ2. Oh, unless, do people get 2 supplementaries from one question, or is it?
It's a maximum of 2 supplementaries.
Maximum of 2. So you do have another supplementary if you want one?
No, but since I got the microphone, I just want to thank all the councillors, really, and all the officers for the hard work, and wish you a Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. And I would say, yeah, I was up late doing this. I can only imagine that the 2 officers to my left and right were up very early in the morning to try and make sense of my responses and to get them into this format. So, yay, thank you. That's, PQ2, Dan.
Yeah, so I guess I'll wait for your fuller response in writing. Please can you, when you write that response, explain how it was compatible with the UK law on human rights, particularly given the decision given in the case Heatham versus Public Services Ombudsman, which includes civil servants are, of course, open to criticism, including public criticism. Where critical comment is made of a civil servant, such that the public interest in protecting them as well as their private interests are in play, the requirement to protect that civil servant must be weighed against the interest of open discussion of matters of public concern. I'll send you a link to that case.
Thank you, that'd be really helpful. And I absolutely will apply my mind to it and get advice on it. But thank you very much. I'm not... and do you have any further supplementaries?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have Mike Aldrieve present or Joanna Booth present today, but again, apologies to them, and I will make it known in writing as well and get them something slightly fuller as soon as I possibly can. Would either Suzanne or Dan like to speak to their statements under PS01 and PS02?
I don't think I need to. I think I covered it in my question, so thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so my statement was about how the council seems to be working under the new committee system, and it seems to me that most of the council seems to be working well, except the Homes and Housing Committee is an omni-shambles. The councillors don't seem to understand the papers they're meant to be discussing. Officers seem to be giving very optimistic dates for when problems will be sorted out by, and then when those dates pass, councillors are not asking any follow-up questions about why those things have not happened. Decisions are being made in secret and not published. For example, the Housing Management Board has apparently been shut down, because shutting that down while the housing department is being transformed is obviously a great choice, is obviously great for people's confidence in the council. And I would have thought that the decision to create a housing directorate and recruit to the newly created role of Executive Director of Housing would be a decision taken by the Homes and Housing Committee. But no, it's been taken by the Chief Executive and not published. Is my understanding.
Apologies, I'm just going to come in very, very quickly there. Thank you very much for your statement. I want to be really, really careful that I'm abiding by the rules as given to me. I'm aware that my vice chair is signalling as well. Is that pretty much it? Is there more?
I was just going to say that how the Homes and Housing Committee is functioning is a great concern to me.
Thank you very much. I'll come to my vice chair very quickly.
Thanks, Chairman. Obviously, we're all entitled to our opinions, but I don't actually agree with Dan's estimation, of course. In my view, actually, the members, most of whom were new, so they had to get up to speed, both with the housing priorities and the questions and the knowledge, have performed very well, actually, cross-party, in my view. With regard to actually, although, and in fact, one issue the chairman and I have discussed is there been more questions rather than debate, which slightly reflected the need of members to understand. And for example, the last committee on Friday, which I chaired in Councillor Parsons' absence, we actually had 2 members' Teams briefings where they could ask questions on finance and also the transfer of homes from general needs to afford temporary accommodation the week before, just so members could actually have proper information and the chance to actually consider their responses with regards to the decision about the officer's structure. This is, of course, as Mr. O'Gara knows, matter for the head of paid service. Currently, the interim Chief Exec Paul Martin, but has the courtesy, the strategic housing review, which at his instruction, the Director of Housing, Michael Scora, has compiled over 8 months. They presented to the penultimate committee. Members actually supported the recommendation unanimously, and he's taken that into account. So certainly the status of the Director of Housing will be elevated to the Executive Directorship, and then that Executive Director, when appointed, can actually work with the HR and work with the new Chief Exec to devise the structure underneath them, and that will be reported to the Policy Committee.
No, thank you. Just for what it's worth, and to close this bit of the meeting off, I would say that schemes of delegations where accountability lies and where questions are properly directed to, is a challenge in local authorities where they're using the same systems that they've been using for years. And at the moment, we're trying to figure out how things work under literally the polar opposite kind of governance structure that the council had 6 months ago, or a little over that. We will be figuring this out as we go somewhat, but I think as long as we maintain that we're all trying to do this in good faith and to serve the public as best we can, I think we'll be able to pursue reform and clarification in a way that makes the operation of the council better. I hope that's the objective of everyone on the committee, and I'm sure it is, let's say. So let's crack on with the meeting. That brings us to the meat of the meeting, leadership, functions, roles and decision-making structures. So, I will ask Tim O'Gara to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make some very brief introductory comments on the report just to guide members through what is in here. So this is a report that considers that sets out for you the structure and functions of full council and the policy committees and the relevant leadership roles and responsibilities that were established as part of the new governance arrangements. The report does have a number of appendices, and they follow the structure of the report. The first of which covers the functions of full council, which are fairly detailed but prescribed ostensibly by legislation, but also derived from custom and practice, which is not dissimilar to the way that most full councils operate within the local government sector. Then we move on to the functions and responsibilities of the policy committees, and you have in the second appendix the detailed responsibilities of the 8 policy committees, which are set out in the report, as well as the 2 standing subcommittees that we have. And then we move on to the leadership roles and responsibilities, which are set out in the third appendix to the report. And this sets out the detail that we articulated for the first time in respect of the key roles and special responsibilities that some councillors have on the council, and they're all set out there for you for your consideration. Those are the 3 main appendices. There's a 4th which contains some summary data relating to the number of policy committees, the number of reports that have been to policy committees, and the amount of public forum that has been to those committees over the last 6 months or so. As was the practice with the committee model working group, this review group has a number of questions which are not exclusive, but certainly will help you to guide your way through a discussion of the key matters in the report. I'm happy to take questions and support you through the technical aspects of the report. Chair, thank you.
Thanks very much. So yes, the papers have been structured around the questions under each specific topic area. That said, every issue that has been raised with me in respect to this committee, I would say this is fair to say, has either been very big, broad and nebulous, or incredibly granular and detail-focused. What I want to make sure that we don't do is to treat everything on this list in that sort of middle space. If there is something big, vague and nebulous, I think we need to tackle it in a way that's appropriate to that. And equally, if there's something very granular, I don't think we need to examine the whole subject area around it. If it's something where a simple proposal for a tweak can simply be captured and considered. So with that in mind, and one more thing, and this is really, really critical, others have said it, I think it's really important that the nature of this review process is that nothing will be decided until everything is decided. That's to say, we will not be making final decisions on anything today. It may well be that this committee's recommendations to full council include options. It may well be, if this committee can't decide this thing or that thing, that our recommendation to full council is choose between this thing and that thing. And I just urge everyone to bear that in mind. I would say it's more important at this point to capture all of the things that we want to tackle in this area. We may well be able to add details, and options may well be ruled in or out in our January and February meeting, and then we'll reconsider all of this in March. So for now, I'd encourage you to be wide-ranging, but really specific, if that's at all possible. I have a small list of things that people have raised with me as the chair. I'm sure there are others. Is there anyone now, first of all, who would like to suggest something from this that will need more time than anything else? As in something that's particularly weighing on them, that I think we're going to need a good chunk of time to look at that.
Could I just speak in a way it's not actually to thrust something forward, Chairman? I suppose I have 3 metaphorical hats on this working group. Firstly, I think I am the only policy vice chairman here, so obviously I have experience of that. There's another policy chairman, of course, and a committee chairman here. I'm also with you the only 2 permanent members serving on this who were on the previous constitutional or a committee model working group. I'm also with Councillor Williams, the only member who can remember the previous committee model before 2000. Councillor Dud may probably think this, he must look enviously at the situation, I guess, because I know in the late 90s, Labour had a majority of 53. There were small bands of Tories and Lib Dems, of course. So although we had the committee model, not a single other party had a chairmanship or a vice chairmanship. We weren't even allowed to serve on the selection panels which interviewed senior officers. So there's quite a change. I mean, this is not just, in my view, involving members in a way which we haven't been involved for 12 years at least. And arguably since 2001 we had the leader and cabinet, a leader in cabinet model. But equally it seems to be a far more open, and hopefully it's something we can work on to make even more transparent to Bristolians, of course. My plea is, I do remember Tim Agora saying, please don't ask me to rewrite the Constitution. And I empathise with that. Something he and I share a view is that, as you'll be aware, this is going to be a continuing process of review. Our job, we set this review body up 6 months after it started. In my view, we can probably correct any obvious errors or things we can do better, of course, but it's probably too soon to see how it's panning out. For example, personally, I suspect we need to allow the 9 policy committees to bed in for a couple of years and then to review whether we believe the number and the remit of each is appropriate. I don't believe there's an urgent need yet. I would also say, there's a danger for members to try to tinker with so many things. You know, and I know, and the officers certainly know how hard pressed they are. So I think at this stage, we need to look at any glaring errors or omissions and not actually trying to reinvent the wheel. Regarding roles, I've heard several people question the role of the deputy leader of council or the remit. She's not here, so I would suggest we leave that until such time as she is here and can answer that. Personally, I think the job description we've seen is fine. Regarding the vice chairs of the policy committees, I think there's a case to actually make that more explicit. I would like to add to that. I'm happy with what the terms of reference is, and I speak as one myself, and it's very clear as part of that, your job is to act as a deputy on behalf of the chairman. And this week, for example, while Councillor Parsons had recovered from his surgical procedure, I've chaired the committee, I've chaired Monday's PCCB, chair's briefing, of course. I've made or confirmed various decisions, copying him in, and yesterday I was present, he couldn't be, at the Housing and Customer Standards Project. We're looking at the reviews. And with that, the officers I've spoken to believe the system's working well. What we need to do, in my view, is to actually confirm that it's consistent. Bristolians for officers, for members. So what happens in one policy committee is a similar, identical to the next. So that's my penny, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Eddy. I hadn't seen any other hands. I do want to give just in that I have had obviously discussions with my vice chair and with Green colleagues. I've had some discussion with some members of the Liberal Democrat group. I haven't had any discussions with any members of the Labour group in respect of this, and I do want to make sure that you get your time, as it were. I've seen an indication from Councillor Brown, but comes Councillor Brown first, please, and then Councillor Breyer.
To respond to your question about whether there's any particular areas that might need considered, I think one area that's been raised with me a number of times is the role of strategy and resources and its membership. If its job is to drive the strategy of the council, one proposal or one suggestion that's been made to me is that potentially it should be composed of the chairs of the policy committees with suitable arrangements to make sure that proportionality is respected. But there is to some extent, I think, a disconnect between myself, for example, as chair of Economy and Skills, and the Strategy and Resources Committee, where there is obviously an element of overlap and ultimately responsibility for the budget envelope of my committee.
Thanks, Andrew. I did see Councillor Breyer's hand, but I'll come to Councillor Dudd first.
Yeah, I don't know what. So how are we working? So we're just general points.
I was going to say just to flag briefly any specific issues that you want to make sure that we make time for on the agenda for the remainder of the meeting.
Yeah, I think sort of general points. I think Richard's right that it's only been 6 months, so I think certain things it's far too early to tell whether it's working or not. So an example would be like area committees. I mean, we've only just had our first meeting about a month ago, and then people are talking about how we reform them already. So I think it's far too early to look at area committees, and I probably do have some questions about whether certain things will work or not, like the things like the equity fund and things. But it's not even been set up yet. So how can we review it when it's not even being set up properly? Because my understanding of the equity funds was a little bit different a year ago than it seems to be being proposed at the moment. So that is a question, but I think it is too early and we need to let it run, I think, for another year or so just to see how it's going. In terms of the number of policy committees, I don't think we should have any fewer committees, but we're kind of agnostic on whether things need to be moved around, or do we need another committee, or is the workload too high on certain committees and other functions need to be sort of moved around to make sure there's a fair workload in terms of what members are looking at. I think, that's an interesting point you make, Andrew, about the Strategy and Resources Committee. So that should be sort of have a broader view of things, and I think it's a bit too narrow at the moment, which leads me to question, because I think issues say like how we manage our property portfolio is being dealt with very narrowly on a financial question, and that does concern me, because I don't think we're making as much use of the property we own for other potential uses within the council, because we're just looking at it from a very narrow financial point of view, because I think that's what that committee thinks it's there to do, rather than have a sort of a broader view, and potentially if you've got chairs on that committee, and I take your point about proportionality, I'm sure there's ways of getting around that. I think you may make a fair point that you get a broader view of things, and just on the history lesson, Richard, thanks for that. And your point about obviously Labour having 53 members back in the late 90s. I guess that answers the question that elections have consequences, don't they?
Yeah.
So is not. We don't always do things because that they're the rules set out in the Constitution. Obviously, who you vote and who you return to this chamber is quite clearly going to have an impact on how the systems run. So it's not a constitution. It's a political question as well, isn't it? So, but they're my sort of general points at the moment. I don't know if Kaz has got anything to add, or we'll let Rob come in first. No.
Okay, I suppose my general areas of interest that I think we should definitely talk about are the vice chair role, as Rich has already said. I think that needs looking at because of the way it does give, let's be honest, access to the vice chair to specific information, which is fine. I think that's important. But if that vice chair is not supportive of the chair, that is problematic. So I think we need to talk about that. Not just because the chair needs to be respected and because they have to agree with everything, but because is that actually what a vice chair role is? I think there's a sort of more fundamental question there. I do have concerns about the number of committees and whether all of them are perfectly formed, but then you never have perfect democracy, of course, but I do think there's some things that could be shifted about those. Just literally looking through here. I think it's quite important to talk through again, not just the vice chair of the policy committees, but as you say, the deputy leader of the council and the leader of the council and how those roles function, how they're defined and how people perceive them in terms of the public. If people perceive that the deputy leader of the council is just someone who steps in, they will think of that role as somehow being in some way peripheral, weirdly, because they maybe don't have as much influence as maybe it's actually they probably do. They probably do have more influence than that suggests. And I think that would probably be it. I am interested in area committees, as Kai says, it's just being set up. I do think there's scope to look at how those functions are, what functions are delegated to those, but I don't know whether we're too soon for that. I also think one of my big frustrations is how little time there is to actually have motions heard at full council. That's a massive issue, I think, for me at the moment. I think all, just speaking candidly, I think all political groups should get a motion in each, to submit a motion in each council meeting, and so we should make space for that. I think that would be good for Bristol's democracy. I think it would be good for people's sense that they have say within that meeting, and it would just make for a more interesting meeting, frankly, because I think there'd be a lot more interesting discussion. The public would have a much better view of what the different groups think, what different councillors think. So those are my sort of first thoughts about what I think is a priority for this meeting.
Hi, thanks very much. Okay, so I personally think that we should be really looking at, we should definitely have a bit of a dive into full council. I think full council needs to be completely remodelled. I think at the moment, obviously it's constitutionally bound, so all the constitutional things that need to happen at full council we need to be doing. However, maybe full council should actually lend itself more to the public, so we should maybe open up more public forum. Maybe we should, in most other committee systems, public forum is actually a lot longer. Allow people to speak longer. 1 minute is very quick, so allow them a little bit longer to explain their points, and obviously have their questions given back to them fully and without reverence. So full council needs to be looked at. It's at the moment, it literally is etiquette and performative. So most of the motions that we were talking about, Rob's just been talking about, could actually be just directed straight to the chairs of the committees, and that is pretty much where policy and powers is devolved to. So I'd like to look at that. Going back to, the policy committees, yes, some of the policy committees have far too much on their agenda and others don't, so I think that has to be remodelled. And maybe there should be an overarching, maybe bring back OSM, overarching kind of like scrutiny scenario there, or maybe reduce the amount of committees to bring in an OSM, but that's something else that we can discuss, obviously. equalities and environment should actually fully underpin every single of the policy committees. So we could look at how we can reduce maybe some of those committees to actually underpin policies and environment and equalities that should be underpinning every single policy committee anyway. So we should be looking at that. And as far as the area committees are concerned, well, I think they should be devolved more, but that's something that we can actually discuss at another point. But definitely full council, extending it more to public, it should be a public forum.
Thank you very much. Councillor Self.
Thanks, Chair. So I think I'm probably the least experienced member here in this committee today, so that's one reason why I've kind of joined it. So I'll just give my own perspective in terms of the policy committees. I think probably in terms of numbers, they're probably about right, but I am concerned about maybe the different workloads between the different policy committees. Certainly my own committee, Transport Committee, has been quite a good one in terms of there's been plenty coming to us, and I think that's good. Sometimes it feels like it's perhaps a bit too much sometimes to when you've got particularly when you've got an issue where you've got 150 public statements, and I do like to read as many of those as possible, and it's good to have engagement from the public in those policy committees. I kind of agree with what Councillor Eddy said in terms of, and others, in terms of maybe letting it bed down a little bit before we make wholesale changes, unless there's a particular issue with any committees that maybe need to be identified. But I kind of feel it needs a bit more time to bed down. In terms of the sort of leadership roles, then I'm quite happy with the way the chairs seem to be performing on the whole. Again, good. Just on my own experience, Councillor Plowden seems to be doing a good job as chair of the Transport Committee. Can't speak for the other chairs, obviously, but my perception is, it's generally okay. I do kind of wonder about the sort of vice chair and deputy leader roles and what they're actually doing. I think there's several questions about those, which I won't sort of go into the actual issues, but maybe we can come to those in some future meetings and talk about those in a bit more detail. Full council, I kind of agree that what Councillor Stone said, that I do feel sometimes as a sort of fairly new member that sometimes I'm a little bit dull, if I'm honest. As much as I like to hear about Treasury management reports and procurement, and some people get really excited about these things. I know they're important to council, of course they're important to council, but for the public and for myself, who perhaps are more interested in more sort of nebulous things in terms of having transport issues and bins and potholes and all those sort of things. Treasury reports, perhaps maybe there's a different way of doing full council. In terms of public forum, I just feel that unless we're going to make a bigger change with full council, that the current half hour is probably about right, and the 1 minute I think is I think people need to be mindful it is just 1 minute and speak to the 1 minute. Because the statement is there, and we do try to read the statements, and it's just trying to summarise it and put the point across. I appreciate other people have different views on this. And then on the area committees, well, we've just started the area committee process, and I was pleased to become a chair of the area committee 1, which we had a chairs meeting just yesterday, which has sort of brought out a lot of issues we're going to be discussing. So I think, again, it needs to be bedded down. Just going back to full council, in fact, we'll talk about the motions. I do find the motions quite interesting, but I just wonder if maybe the silver motion process might be something that we need to look at in terms of how those are allocated. It's drawing out the hat just seems a bit odd to me. That it's sort of kind of a bit by luck that you could have a situation where a party could have one member on the council, and they could be fortunate to have every single silver motion. Unlikely, I know, but maybe they need to be a bit more proportional. Just back to area committees before so we've got lots of issues coming to area committee. The chairs are meeting with those. One thing that has come up that I've kind of latched onto is a number of sort of informal meetings that go on in the background, and also the sort of subcommittees of policy committees, which concern me a little bit at this point in time in terms of transparency. We say we want to be transparent and open. It does seem like there are some things going on in the background in these informal meetings and subcommittees. We need to be really clear as to what is actually allowed to go on in those, that it needs to be not decision making, but discussions around, I don't know, maybe the process or whatever. But yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. We've now had one complete go around of everyone that's spoken so far. I think is it people want to come back quickly on specific points?
Could I, very briefly, missibly briefly, could I endorse what Andrew and I said about the Strategy and Resources Committee consisting of the policy chairs? Before 2000, we used to have the old Policy and Resources Committee chaired by the leader of council with the committee chairman on that. And as Kai said, I'm sure it's not beyond the wit of Mr. Agora to devise a formula to preserve the balance. I agree, I do find full council frustrating, but it's not within the remit of this working group, so let's not trouble ourselves with that. We've got quite enough to trouble. I agree with Kaz, though, about public forum. We want, in my view, to encourage more Bristolians to contribute, but we've got 13 minutes, so if they actually send their full statement, we've all got at least 24 hours to read that electronically. And then if they can summarise in 1 minute, we can get more in. And finally, with the vice chair, we shouldn't distract ourselves too much about personalities and politics, because we can't allow for that, of course. But clearly it's important. There's good rapport and support given by the vice chair to the chair. And it concerned me, Chairman, when we met with the policy chairs, that some clearly didn't feel properly supported. And that's unadvisable. And I'd even go so far, if vice chairmen don't attend weekly PPCs, actually we should look, without just reason, like illness or work sometimes, we should look at whether they should receive a special responsibility allowance.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just going to flag, if it's really, really quick.
I just want to make very 2 points. First of all, if you want more public involvement, then just increase the time from half hour to an hour. That's 1 point. And most other committee systems across the country have 1 hour's worth of public forum. So it's like, presidented. And the other thing is that I think we should look for change, like now, quickly, because when it is embedded, it becomes cultural. And when it's cultural, it becomes, we've always only had 8 committees. Why are we changing it now? So I think change is needed. And I think, to move away from change, I think is the wrong thing to do. As soon as it's embedded, it's really difficult to change. This is the time to do it, to change things in the reviews.
I think without going into too much detail about the principles of how this committee operates, but I think we've got quite a comprehensive list. I'm aware that Councillor Brown indicated, and I do want to give an opportunity to everyone else, but I really do want to move on to substantive discussion of what's on the agenda. Thank you all for laying out. If there's anything else to add to that list, please do indicate. Other than that, I'll come to Councillor Brown, Councillor Dudd, and then we are moving on to the agenda, okay?
Yeah, it was just very quick to pick up on Councillor Self's comment about subcommittees, and I think potentially you're talking about the sort of working groups and that task groups and that sort of thing, but specifically about the finance subcommittee, I know that we're going to look at the budget setting process in March, which is just to set just to mark members' cards that's going to be the role of the finance subcommittee in the budget setting process is going to be a big part of that.
That's great, thank you. And Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, we can move on. I was just going to make a point about public forum, but there we go. Never mind.
No, bless you. And I do promise we will be coming to public forum as part of full council. And I should say the workings of full council is one thing that we will be discussing, I think, in one way or another in both January and February. And I have captured everything that has been said. I'm sure Lucy has as well, to make sure that if something isn't within necessarily our agenda today, it is something that we've captured to bring back at the meeting where we're looking at it again. So in terms of just going to allow my computer to log me back in. Doesn't even recognise me this morning. Thank you. So in terms of powers that are reserved to full council, in terms of the question posed in the papers, are there any powers members feel should be brought back to full council that have been delegated either to officers or committees? Councillor Breyer?
I did want to broach the sort of way that currently the agenda is set for full council. I don't know whether this falls within this. Maybe it doesn't. A lot of the agenda is set by party group leaders and whips. So that isn't, as I understand it, a formally constituted group. Again, I'm happy to be corrected on that. So I do think there's a question mark there about what the function, how the functions responsibilities function, because at the moment it's largely taken by decisions within those groups, it feels to me.
Apologies. I have an indication from monitoring officer and an indication from Councillor Dudd. So I'll first. Oh, Councillor Dudd first.
Yeah, I guess in terms of the question you're putting to us today, the answer is no. We think the powers, but agree with you how the meeting's conducted. But yeah. I guess you said we're going to deal with that at another meeting, aren't we? Rather than today.
I'll just come back on that very quickly.
Because if we are discussing that today, then I probably do have things. But if not,
okay, well,
I'll save it. I'll save it for the meeting where we are.
I do want to come to that under the auspices of the role and responsibilities of the Lord Mayor, because I do think the point that Councillor Breyer is making is pertinent to a discussion of the Lord Mayor's roles and responsibilities. But I'll come to my legal advisor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to make it clear to members that the agenda meetings, in the same way as you have agenda setting meetings for the policy committees, are meetings that are chaired by the Lord Mayor, because it is the Lord Mayor's meeting, and the representatives who come to those planning meetings are the party group leaders and the whips and officers from legal and democratic services. So the planning for that meeting and is done in a broadly similar way, but because of the nature of full council and there's no other leads for that other than the party group leaders and the whips, and it's done in that spirit of collegiality. So I just wanted to make it clear that that follows a very similar way process to the way that agenda setting is done for other meetings. Obviously, we don't publish forward plans, and there's no obligation to do so for full council. But and just for completeness, Chair, there are legal matters that must be discharged by full council, and for the benefit of members, in Appendix 1 you have a list of the full council responsibilities. And in sections A to G, A to I, those are the legal things that must be discharged by full council. The remaining things are things that are done by custom and practice, and like I said earlier, are the things that would be done by most councils in the local government sector. So I just wanted to make that draw members' attention to those particular points in the appendix. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, and I would say, just to try and draw these two things together, in terms of the points that have been raised so far, I would say whilst, for example, the adoption of the annual library plan is a matter for full council and must be done by full, whether it's necessary or not to have 4 speakers from each party talk for 5 minutes as a matter of course, irrespective of the controversiality or level of public interest in that item or not, is a decision for the Lord Mayor with agenda setting. And I do sometimes wonder how clear everyone's roles are. And I do think that's something that has really, really come up both in response to this agenda and also in the public forum today, in respect of who has responsibility for answering questions from members of the public, who has responsibility for setting agendas, who has responsibility for consulting with officers on decisions in an appropriate way. There needs to be, I would say, really greater degree of understanding among elected members about these issues. And I do think that's something that we will discuss momentarily. Councillor Reddy, if it's a quick one.
Very quickly, I'm not really in the habit of adding to the agenda or certainly the workload, but I serve an Avon Fire Authority. Most other surrounding authorities have an annual report. So there are outside bodies which members serve on cross-party, and at present we don't have any feedback to this forum.
That's an interesting. Okay, no, that's good to capture. In which case, having sort of not vested our discretion, but not identified anything in particular in respect of the powers and functions of full council, which isn't to say that we might not find things in our discussions later today or in January or February that do require additional functions to be reserved to full council. But for now, I think we're reasonably safe to move on to function and responsibilities of committees. So in addition to what's been raised already, the things that have been raised with me so far have been as to whether I'm just going through these in no particular order, nor am I advocating for any of these. Just to be clear, these are ideas that have come to me. Members may wish to pull things out of the appendices as well. But the remit of Public Health and Communities Committee, where some parts of that sit currently and could sit. For example, one that's been raised is, could public health sit alongside adult social care? The relationship between Bristol Waste and two of the council's committees, and the volume of decision-making left in environment and sustainability when you take when you consider Bristol Waste in isolation, which also kind of reports to strategy and resources. The idea of bringing back some sort of overview and scrutiny management is a sensitive one, I appreciate. And I don't wish to open up a political debate or to be provocative with it. I do think a lot of the discussions around chairs and vice chairs, which is one of those huge things that has been raised over and over and over again, reflects two different visions of how this chamber works and how this council works in the context of committee system, where is the modus operandi of the council, if you like, one of total collaboration and openness between members, or actually is scrutiny and accountability better provided by a sort of an oppositional model, as in having an official opposition or not? Excuse me. I do think that's a legitimate question, and I do think this working group should at least consider the idea of creating something more robust. The need for better scrutiny arrangements have been raised pretty consistently since the move to the committee model. I do think it's something that we should consider. And just to reflect, so things that have already been raised, but strategy and resources having a combination of responsibilities for that which is overarching, as well as specific portfolio responsibilities for things like culture. I have to admit, I concur with the view expressed so far that strategy and resources should purely be an overarching committee, and actual portfolio areas should sit with policy committees other than itself. I'm not persuaded finally either way, but I think conversation around that would be helpful. Area committees are something I have a particular interest in and a particular focus on, and that I particularly championed during the committee model working group. I don't want to sort of allow my particular interest in it to unreasonably dominate our discussions today, but it is something I want to touch on before we finish, and particularly the way in which it's developed. So, to look at taking these in order, let's come to the questions as asked formally. Is the role and responsibilities of all councillors clearly defined and understood? Oh, apologies, I've skipped down one. Is the number of committees appropriate? We've had the view expressed that there may not be enough and that there are also potentially both that there are too many and too few. So does anyone particularly want to make any argument on this point? I would really please ask you to be quite specific in your proposals. Like, general points are great, points principles are great, but I need to ask officers to look into specific options if we wanted to say remove a committee or so first hand I saw was Councillor Eddy's, followed by Councillor Stone's, followed by Councillor Brown's.
I'll be very brief and to the point. In my view, as I've said before, I think we do need to have it to bed in before we make judgment. In my view, there's no howling omissions or errors, of course, though I would happily look at one or two functions to shift from one committee to another if we deem that appropriate. And I would also say, my heart goes out. I saw on the way in John Smith, who reports to 6 policy committees. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So I really wouldn't. I don't think we have the resources to actually increase it. I've always said, if the answer to any question is more politicians or more meetings rather than more effective decision making, you're asking the wrong question.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Councillor Portney. Yes, so some specifics, and this is, like I said, this is just a conversation. I just wanted to make sure we put it out there. The conversation is that, first of all, to maybe merge, what was it? I was going to merge, is in my notes, environmental and economy and skills with sustainability and the environment. To merge those two, I purely did that on data, on looking at the data that was in the report, looking at how much is coming through those two policy committees. But they do actually really do combine quite well if you really look at actually what they're doing. And the other thing was obviously to bring in some kind of like a scrutiny and an OSM committee. So you're still having 8 committees. You're just kind of like reorganising it all. So maybe an overarching OSM with trying to merge 2 of those committees into one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
I think the number of committees is about right. I do have some thoughts on maybe areas that where there could be movement. I think looking at just the reports as the chair of a committee that's got one of the lower that's had the lower number of key decisions come to us so far. I think just looking at the number of reports and assuming that that's all that the chair is responsible for it doesn't give the complete picture. For example, I'm chair, as well as being chair of economy and skills, I'm automatically chair of the Harbour Committee, which is a considerable additional part of the workload. And there's also a lot of other work that goes on. Local Plan Working Group, again, I'm chair of that. So there is, the roles go beyond just the chairing of the committees, and I'm sure that's true in other aspects of the council where there are other bodies that come alongside the chair role.
No, thank you. Next indication is from Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, just on this. Yeah, I agree with Richard. I think it is too early to tell really. I've got my own views from my experience on the Environment Committee, but I can't tell if it's just the way things have landed and in terms of what the agenda is that time of year, or there's something fundamentally wrong. I think it's just too early to tell. I've been very disappointed about the lack of papers coming forward on the Environment Committee. I think we had the last meeting we didn't have any decisions to make. It was just 2 items for noting. So I've been quite disappointed by that committee, but I don't know whether that's because it's not got enough functions that it's responsible for, or it's just how the calendar's landed and that's it? Or is it because, you know, the chair's not driving the agenda forward? I don't know. It's too early to say, but I think it's probably something you could come back to in a year's time or something, just to see how it's going. And also, I think you do raise a good point there, Lisa. There's some areas where there is like crossover between committees, and I think a lot of that policy is falling through the gaps at the moment. There doesn't seem to be a culture of how we could have, a cross-committee subgroups set up to deal with a particular issue. It's very siloed at the moment, and I guess maybe that partly comes down to how strategy and resources is set up. But for example, skills and the green skills agenda, that's very much something that the Environment Committee would have an interest in, and that obviously sits in the Economy and Skills Committee at the moment. But there's no culture of bringing those two issues together. Whether there's a way constitutionally you could make that easier to happen, or whether it is just culture, custom and practice, I don't know, but I think that probably needs to be looked at. Where issues cross committees, how can we pick those up and make sure they're dealt with, rather than at the moment it's just left? Or I guess there's people on the Environment Committee they're probably wondering what is going on with the Green Skills agenda. Because it's fundamental to what we're trying to do here as a committee through the City Leap project and getting retrofitting of buildings and things like that. That's not going to happen if the skills agenda is not right. But that's another committee that deals with that. Yeah. So that is an issue. And then the Harbour Committee, because I don't think it's being dealt with, it's my view that should be a decision-making body. I personally don't think we're complying fully with the judgment. I think it was Whitby Harbour, where there was a judgment to say that actually the general fund of the council's got to stop interfering with the management of a harbour. It needs to be ring-fenced and run separately, whereas we've got a system where we've set up a committee that only advises and makes recommendations and is not actually running the harbour. In theory, it's the Economy and Skills Committee that are making the final decisions. So I don't think, I don't think we're complying with the judgment properly. 2, it feels like a bit of a waste of my time that I'm reading all the papers, going to the meeting, making my contribution, and at the end of the day, it then goes to the Economy and Skills Committee for a decision. So I feel like I'm wasting my time. And I think the only way to resolve it is to actually make that a proper decision-making function. I know we've got independent members on it, but there's a way around that. You can make them, they can only vote on non-financial matters, or their votes are just advisory. So we've got, Tim O'Gara here. I'm sure he could come up with something that resolves that issue. So you get the advice from the independent members, but you resolve the issue that it's only elected members making the decision. And also it's poor for the members of the public. So they come along to the Harbour Committee, make their statements, and then they have to come along again to an Economy and Skills Committee or a Strategy and Resources Committee where the decision's actually being made. So we're not making it easy for members of the public either.
No, thank you. Apologies, I now have Councillors Breyer, Self, Stone and Brown to speak. However, if it's all right, I'm going to use Chair's discretion. This is exactly the kind of granular thing I was talking about, which we may simply be able to resolve. Dare I test the mood of the room? Is there consensus about asking officers to prepare options for making, whether it's possible or not, but some sort of investigation into making the Harbour Committee a decision-making body in its own right? Does anyone want to speak against that as a...
I mean, it's something I've got my thoughts on as well, and there's a lot of overlap between my thoughts and Councillor Dudd's thoughts. My question is whether this is the right forum to be instigating that, given that the harbour governance model is so new. We're only two meetings into, or 3 meetings into that model as well, because it's only been in place since May. But that's my, I am open to options on that front.
I'm just going to take legal advisor.
Just very briefly, and we could spend quite a lot of time talking about the Harbour Committee, but to answer Councillor Dudd's very specific question about whether the Harbour Committee could have decision-making powers, the answer is yes, it can, but it would also need to operate within the parameters of any budget envelope that's delegated to it by full council, because even though it is, you know, there is a need to have a standalone Harbour Committee. It's not separate and outside of the council's wider governance. So we did take advice on this a couple of years ago when we were looking at all the harbour revision arrangements, and I've got an advice note in front of me here that that covers off that very point. So I'd be happy to talk to any councillors in a little bit more detail about the various ways that could work outside of this meeting, Chair. But probably too much detail for this meeting, and I'd be doing it a little bit on the hoof. But that general principle is sound, Councillor Dudd, that it could have decision-making powers that would be delegated to it, as well as approved budgets and levels of expenditure, etc.
So on that note, unless there's any objections, I'm happy to ask for that advice and those options to be circulated to the committee so that we can consider it in March. Is that?
Yeah, happy with that. Just on that point, no, I think it is because it's meant to have a ring-fenced budget, so money generated from the harbour should only be spent on the harbour, and vice versa. So I think financially it makes it cleaner to have that as a separate body.
So Chair, just on that particular point, Councillor, we have for this financial year established a ring-fenced harbour account as part of the council's budget framework. So that has been done, and that was put in place with effect from the 1st of April this year.
Perfect. Something resolved. We'll move on to Councillor Breyer.
Yeah, I was just looking at Appendix 4, which is called Policy Committee Data. I think it's interesting that clearly there's far more reports, and if you're looking at whether it's the appropriate number of committees, which is the question before us, it does seem there are far more reports to Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. Now, I understand that's because it's a financial, economic management, those kind of questions that kind of come more to that committee. First of all, does that include the Finance Subcommittee? I assume it does, that figure, 116, or is that separate still? That's still separate. So that is quite a large difference, I would say. And so I suppose there's two ways of approaching that. Is do you then say, oh, we split up strategy and resources so it's in more subcommittees, more people involved, which is one approach. Or you think through how and whether some of those things that are coming to that committee could go to the committees, because that's a very large discrepancy in terms of reports. And that's a lot of reading. So we've already discussed that some people think that policy chairs should be the members of strategy and resources, just bearing in mind that policy chairs have an awful lot of reading to do anyway for their own committees. Is that a reasonable sort of expectation that they would read what is the largest burden in terms of their understanding of the decisions that they will have to make? Is that a good thing to be doing? I would suggest it might not be, which is probably counter to what other people have said here, interestingly. I don't have a massive problem with strategy and resources being just kept as a committee that's open like all the others.
I had an indication.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on Strategy and Resources Committee. It meets every month, unlike the other policy committees which meet every other month. So that will in part account for the discrepancy in the volume of papers. It also has a number of reports, as Councillor Breyer said, that are reported there routinely, like corporate risk registers, performance reports, all of which can go in some way, shape or form to the other policy committees. But given that it meets every month, you could almost cut that figure in half to get a truer reflection of what the amount of workload is to compare it to the other committees.
Okay, that helps greatly. Sorry, can I just come back on that? Because I think that helps greatly. I didn't realise that. And it's good to learn that is probably commensurate then. So I don't really have any concerns about the number of committees, but I do think what people have said about environment and sustainability and economy and skills does bear thinking about.
Thank you very much. Come to Councillor Self.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to agree with Councillor Eddy in terms of letting the policies bed down a bit, and I think maybe there is a possible need to look at shifting a few things about. My own experience on the Transport Committee, for example, was something came to us back in July to sign off some capital expenditure on the amphitheatre electrical system. And I thought it was on the Transport and Connectivity Committee. That just seemed a bit odd, but apparently sort of capital projects as well are all fine. But maybe there's little things on that. Maybe in terms of the sort of workloads between the different policies we see from Appendix 4, there are different amounts coming to the policy committees. And while I'm talking about Appendix 4, I just want to point out that Transport and Connectivity Policy Committee, because the deadline was the 5th of December, we actually had 73 questions and 156 statements on the 5th, which has bumped us up to 367, so we would have been topping that column there. But and we just need to be mindful that in terms of the number of policy committees, that several members do have jobs outside. They're trying to balance or family commitments, jobs with what they're doing. For me personally, it feels the number of committees I'm on just about right. I wouldn't sort of see us having it'd be sort of 9 plus or minus, or is it 8 plus or minus 1? It's not going to be a huge change. Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is the £500,000 for delegation. That feels about right to me, but I am concerned about numbers less than that, maybe £450,000. What kind of scrutiny is that getting from other people? Because we're mindful of the sort of financial situation of the council. Is that the right number, £500,000? Is there more we can do to be looking at numbers that may be between £250,000 and £500,000 to keep an eye on what's being spent? Any other thoughts?
I will just flag that the delegations to officers and delegations to chairs in some ways are the purview of the January meeting. That said, I would say something that I think is very pertinent to the agenda that's in front of us today is the clarity around those things. Now, for what it's worth, I think the financial threshold as set is one question, but there are equally something might have a much lower financial implication but generate much, much more public interest. I think just to look at the issues that have come before Public Health and Communities, which has generated overwhelmingly more public forum than any other committee, looking back at the work programme for that committee, neither of those issues was about anything particularly financially significant, but was clearly of significance to people within the city and to members of council as well. So I do think that's something that we'll need to look at and talk about in January. Next on my list, I've got Councillor Eddy, is Councillor Stone.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to the point of maybe bringing in economy, skills and the environment and sustainability. But actually, when you really think about it, a lot of these committees do actually, as Councillor Dudd was saying, they do actually overlap. And maybe there should be some kind of like formation of a overarching committee that can have a look at that. Maybe it's the Strategy and Resources Committee, Policy Committee that would do that sort of thing. So again, thinking about the environment, sustainability underpins every single thing that we should be doing actually as we go forward, and maybe that could be incorporated in all the other committees. But going back to the point that Councillor Breyer was talking about, which is the Strategy and Resources Committee. Now, I understand that 116 is you've got reports, that's monthly, but that doesn't still detract from the amount of work that those people have to do. They're still reading 116 reports, whether it's every 2 monthly or every monthly. It doesn't detract that amount of work. And also, they are also chairs of policy, so they are actually working, they're reading also, everything else about their policy as well. So I think we have to really think about possibly, maybe, making that small or splitting that into 2, as Councillor Breyer was mentioning.
Okay. And I have Councillor Brown next on my list. Given the tone of the discussion that's happened so far, is there general consensus within the working group that strategy and resource should, given the volume of workload, that strategy and resources should be limited to being an overarching committee, as in it should not have portfolio items as any other committee. Does anyone want to speak against that idea? I caught you guys. Sorry, so given the tone of the discussion so far, is there a general consensus amongst the working group that strategy and resources should be an overarching committee with strategic responsibilities only? That's to say it shouldn't have elements of its portfolio like culture, for example, sitting within it. I will very quickly...
Yeah, it's a small point.
Yeah?
What's the data around... And we haven't got that in front of us, so what is the data at present about what currently the split is between what you characterised as portfolio or... I can't remember what you said for the other category.
I will be really blunt with you.
Yeah.
The committee model working group, when it met, made I would say a snap decision. It made a considered decision, but in the context, to simply transfer the cabinet portfolios that exist under the mayoral system, in other words, to convert former executive members into committees. Strategy and resources covered what was historically the mayor's portfolio, is my understanding, and the mayor took specific interest in some portfolio areas, like culture, that weren't delegated to a member of the cabinet, so they were inherited by strategy and resources.
I see, yeah.
It's whether, when it's operating as the strategy and resources committee, we want to keep it with portfolio items within it or not, or is that the right portfolio items, as Councillor Stone suggested, would overarching themes like equalities and sustainability be a better fit than something like, say, the culture brief? I will come to people who've indicated in the order that I had them already, so I'll start with Councillor Brown.
So in direct answer to your question, and I'm actually looking at the list for strategy and resources, because this was one of the things I was going to bring up when we get on to looking at, whether there's anything that's currently allocated to one committee that belongs in another committee. And culture is one of those things that has been, people have suggested to me it should be in my committee's portfolio. Public health and communities has also been mentioned as a potential home for that. So yes, I think that's an anomaly in the system. And looking down the broader list, there are, whilst there's entries for equalities, and then the equality commissions and women's safe city. Whilst I think probably it should have an overarching responsibility for equalities in the city, equality commissions and the women's safe city might belong better in, again, potentially public health and communities portfolio, because there's a lot of overlap there. And just to pick up on when we're talking about public health, it was suggested earlier public health might fit with adult social care. I think it would be buried in the adult social care portfolio.
Thank you, that was really clear and that was appreciated. In terms of the remaining order, yes, Councillor Eddy and then Councillor Dudge.
On the issue of changing strategy and policy remit, I would be reluctant to recommend something unless we have the deputy leader of the council present, or we know the informed view of the leader who chairs it. On Cass's point about the threshold for key decision, I'm conscious what you've said, Chairman. We're discussing this in a later meeting. But can I say, even if it's not a key decision coming to committee, it's likely to go to actually weekly PCCB chairs briefings, where that you have members of two political groups present. Moreover, any decision made is communicated to the committee members cross-party within 2 days. So if they have any issues or concerns, they can raise it. So what I would suggest is it's incredibly transparent in a way perhaps earlier ones wouldn't.
Oh, thank you. I'll come to Tim and then I'm going to... Yeah.
I just wanted to add one other thing to what Councillor Eddy has said there in respect of decisions below the key decision threshold that go through the policy chair's weekly briefings. And it will always be the case that any matter that comes to that forum for a decision, the chair could actually advise officers that they would prefer for that matter to come to their committee for a decision as well, instead of the delegation being exercised by the officer.
Apologies, Councillor Eddy. Quickly, please.
500k, or it affects people in 2 or more wards, and very often that second factor is employed by the chair.
Great, thank you very much. I'll come to Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, just on your point about the Strategy and Resources Committee, I think you raise a fair question now. I don't know if you're right or wrong, but I think I'm happy for like an option, a couple of options to be brought forward on that to the next meeting. So I'm not sort of agreeing a potential solution here, but I think it's right that we look at that and bring some options.
Thank you very much. We've identified a number of specific topics, but give officers broad discretion around that. But I do think it will be good for us to discuss this. Councillor Dudd.
And also just to clarify that cross-cutting point, how do we pick up pieces of work that are cross-cutting? So I know I kind of mentioned that in debate and Lisa's meant, but I think that's quite a serious point actually. How is that part of the culture that we pick up those issues? Is it a constitutional mechanism, or is it a ways of working that we need to highlight more and promote? But I think that's something that we need some options on that as well, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on that last point that Councillor Dudd made, so we did put in place some ways of working around cross-cutting issues. So as you'll all be aware, we have fortnightly meetings of all the policy chairs with the leader, with chief officers in attendance, and that is the place where we would review the forward plans for all of the policy committees, and we would be able to make decisions as to whether there are cross-cutting issues and where the most appropriate committee is for those decisions to sit. Based on the principle that we don't want to duplicate decision making in more than one place, and there would need to be an exercise of a degree of judgment as to where is the best place for something to sit. So that's the arrangement that we have in place at the moment. But as you say, Chair, happy to come back and with some different permutations on that if that's helpful.
No, I agree with you. You can't in a way you can't have 2 committees making a decision about one issue, but there are issues where a committee needs to contribute to that decision. And I think if you allocate it to one or the other, the committee that needs to make a contribution is probably not excluded from making that contribution. So it's just a way of making sure that gets picked up easily. So when we're talking about green skills, for example, members of the Environment Committee can contribute to that policy development and maybe not the final decision, but bringing that policy to a final decision.
I say this as someone who doesn't sit on a policy committee currently. Is it the case that the members of the committee would be advised where an item has been brought to the chair's briefing and not timetabled for discussion by in other words, does the committee have the ability to call in I don't say a decision of the chair from the PBBC, but where a decision is made by council officers in consultation with the chair, and that's recorded on that decision record? Does the committee have sight of that before that decision is made?
It's not really called in formalised, but certainly the decisions made and the notes are circulated to members, and they have every opportunity to actually contact the chair, raise issues, and I have no doubt he would actually respond. What I would say, in fact, Councillor Brown came to our housing PCCB on Monday, war councillors could be called, like we did the previous week, 2 members from Lawrence Hill Ward because it affected them. And equally, we've actually had chairs and vice chairs of another committee, for example, on city leap housing and actually environment. So there is some involvement, and I know Councillor Parsons and Councillor Williams had a workshop meeting about the van dweller strategy and issues, which will come to our February meeting.
That is good to know. I think there's a balance to strike between this wonderful collaboration and collaborative working that's happening behind the scenes and transparency as well. I think that's going to be a difficult balance to strike, but I'm glad those points have been made. Apologies. Is there anyone who's currently waiting to speak on this particular issue? I've seen an indication from not a member of the committee, but given that you are, if it's brief, Councillor Francis.
Sorry, Lorraine, for the webcasting, can you use your mic? Oh, sorry, anyone watching won't be able to.
Yeah, thanks for just allowing me to speak very, very briefly. I just wanted to say that... Sorry. I got a monitor on, I don't know if you can hear it. It's, okay. That there is... I think what you said, without going into loads and loads of detail, because Councillor Eddy sort of said it already, to be fair, it would just need to be documented, and it usually is, because we do cross-party work, but what's not humanly possible because of time and number of reports is to have like open-ended open-ended cross-committee meetings. Do you see what I mean? Because we just can't physically fit any more meetings in, but we do have joint meetings. I've had Barry come to housing, my committee, etc. So we do, and if it's not clear enough, we just need to make it clearer. But it is happening, and I would be really, really worried if we were suddenly saying things are not happening when they are. Okay, thank you for allowing me to speak. Thanks.
No worries, no, sorry, I wouldn't normally, except given that we have a committee, several committee chairs present, but I thought having voice from that particular committee would be quite helpful. Right, in terms of strategy and resources, it sounds like we have a strong direction of travel on this, at least for considering for further investigation and for coming back to you. Can I just confirm, is there also consensus around Councillor Stone's suggestion that equalities, and I will be really careful how I word this, so equalities as in the context of how the council delivers equalities as an exemplar, rather than leading the equalities conversation in the city, and sustainability in terms of the sustainability of the operations of the council, rather than, say, the broader sustainability sector outside. In other words, those two issues as they pertain to the council and how it does business and its own operations should sit within strategy and resources. I kind of think equalities already does.
And personally, I would say I'm agnostic on the issue, but I don't think we can make an informed decision without hearing from Councillor Mack or Councillor Dyer.
Great, we could certainly solicit those views, Councillor Dudd.
I was going to...
I kind of see that as like a central function, the council, like a HR sort of thing, which should sit in strategy and resources really, because it is cross-cutting. It affects all the work we do, so it should sit centrally, not be farmed off.
Consensus, brilliant. Councillor Stone?
Well, I wasn't alluding to that, but I'm quite happy with what you've just mentioned.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Right, moving along at pace, given how little time we have left in this meeting. As I say, we can always come back to things later, but I am keen that we cover as much ground as possible. The next sort of major thing I think we do need to establish a position as a working group on is OSM. Is that something that the working group would like to come back to and look at?
Can I just check where we are in the agenda?
We're still under committees, so if you have any others, but I'm working through the things that have been raised so far in respect of committees. So, Councillor Eddy and Councillor Dudd.
In my view, one of the benefits of having a new cohort of new councillors since May is we've got a new governance structure, and they're not embedded in that 20-year-old history of mindset of the exec versus scrutiny. And it works, in my view, very well. As I've said before, the answer isn't more meetings or more politicians. It's doing what we do in committee better.
Thank you. I am going to call members of the working group to shorten their answers. That just has to happen. I do want to give flex to the Labour group on this, given their position currently.
Well, it's kind of I wasn't expecting this to be proposed today, so I don't think we've had time to consult properly on it. So, but instinctively, I'm not sure about it, but we haven't consulted, so I can't rule it in or out at this stage.
No worries. I think that's one to consult wider with our political groups and come back on. Councillor Brown.
I think this is something, the scrutiny function within committees is something that I think might take longer to bed in as we move through. If your intent to move to a system where we have more options paper and more policy development by the committees, I think in this initial phase we've been working through a lot of things that were well advanced and inherited, and I think we need to move on to see how it beds in once we get to the policy development and options paper phase of things going forward.
Thank you. I get the feeling that there is consensus, albeit I'm just going to take us off the agenda ever so slightly, but in order to sort of deal with this point, I'm going to suggest that there is consensus in the room that the final meeting of the committee model working group currently scheduled for May or April, the last one? March, is not going to be enough to deal with these issues, and that there will need to be some further mechanism for review of the committee system in the future beyond that date. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I just think it's worth working under the assumption that will continue. Fantastic. Having accepted that, just to come back to strategy and resources very, very briefly, there is a slight discrepancy, I think, in the sense that area committees are currently under, depending on your interpretation, strategy and resources, under devolution, and also under public health and communities in respect of other things. Tim?
Sorry, Chair. Devolution under the responsibilities for strategy and resources relates to the devolution agenda from government, as opposed to local devolution to area committees, which sits under the Public Health and Communities Committee.
Right, thank you very much. No, that makes sense, in the sense that devolution to the council is under strategy and resources, devolution from the council. I have to admit, I'm not particularly comfortable with that arrangement. I'm not quite sure how it would be that one committee is able to delegate powers of another committee to an area committee. In other words, how does public health and communities delegate, for example, transport budgets as it exists under the current terms of reference for area committees? I would like to look at area committees moving strategy and resources. Would anyone object? Councillor Dudd.
Yeah, I just think we should leave it as it is for a year and come back to it in a year's time. It's far too soon to look at it.
I do apologise. I've been upgraded by the most important person here. As Kai has said, I do think we haven't only had quarter of an hour meetings. Last month, we've got to actually wait.
Right, apologies. I'm going to cut all of this off now. The point that this work will need to continue beyond, and that we are early into the process, has been made numerous times. We've voted, well, not voted on it, but we've expressed a view on it. The point does not need to be made again. But given that we are going to look at some things at this point, I'm asking whether there is an objection to looking at area committees at this point, since there is from some members of the committee and not from others. Could I just generally have a show of hands if people are willing to look at area committees as part of this process? And anyone who's directly opposed to it? I think there's enough. I will promise those members voting against that we will not take up undue time of this committee looking at it, but I do think it's critical. If it's for what it's worth, I do think the fact that the committee model working group set out a scheme of devolution in terms of reference for area committees. We are now 8 months into the new regime. The committees have met once. They've made decisions pertaining to trees. No further decisions are planned until next municipal year. I think we may wish to start looking at whether that is working, whether that is a priority for looking at now or not. I'll come to Councillor Self, then I'll move on.
But I've already said, Chair, that the chairs of area committees are meeting. We met last night. We'll be meeting on a regular basis for the next 2 or 3 months. So there's work going on, not just the meeting you're talking about. And to me, that feels like enough to be doing with area committees at this point in time. But except that we've had a vote on this.
Thank you, Councillor Self. I'll come to Councillor Stone if it's brief.
I'd just like to make a counter argument, really, to be honest with you, because before, like I said, before culturally things are embedded, this is the time to actually quickly make a review if we want to just change direction, like, for example, more devolution through the area committees.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stone. Councillor Brown.
Just for clarity, I thought the question was, are we saying the responsibility for area committees should be considered as to whether it sits in strategy and resources or public health and communities? I thought that was the extent of the question.
I think there's more to look at in area committees, and there's more time given to area committees in February in terms of the function and role of area committees. And precisely as Councillor Self was alluding, I would say this is solely about its ownership as a committee, as you say. I feel like we've got consensus on this point. I don't think it will take up too much time. Tim.
Just a technical point in respect of area committees. The terms of reference for them were approved by full council, and any changes to their terms of reference would need to go back to full council. It's a separate part of the council's constitution in respect of area committees, and the responsibility that sits with the Public Health and Communities Committee is solely in respect of dealing with the equity fund. In my view, I don't think it has any wider overarching role in respect of area committees. They've got their remit, they've got their terms of reference, and they're able to function. If anything's going to change in that regard, then that is a decision for full council. Thanks.
Thank you for the clarity. Right, I think we have done committees to death and not really left enough time for leadership. Unless, and apologies, one final thing on committees that I would be delinquent in my duties if I didn't raise, was the idea of clustering together some of the regulatory committees, as in, would the committee object to considering the option, for example, of having a chair of planning or a chair of licensing that incorporates both the function of the current licensing committee and public safety and protection, and, for example, elements of public health and communities that currently do policy development in these areas? Is that something people would wish to rule out looking into at this stage? Councillor Eddy?
Enough on plate already, far enough. We don't need to look at that. I've been a DC chairman and a public safety and protection chairman, and I think they have distinct jobs, distinct roles. I don't think we need to actually talk about this. It functions. We actually brought 2 decision-making PSP committees together this year, rather than 2 subcommittees. And remember, the DC system works well because the time frame is different for A and B, so we can have a timely decision of one a month before we have a decision of the other. So that's good for actually timely decision making.
Thanks, Councillor Eddy. Does anyone else want to speak against the idea of considering this option? Councillor Judd and Councillor Brown.
Yeah, it's not really been part of the papers, this is it. So I've not had time to consult with my group whether they want us to look at this or not. So it's kind of like pulling a rabbit out of a hat here, isn't it? Springing this on us now. So from my point of view, I don't think, I haven't got any concerns about how that structure isn't working. So I think we would hear about it if it was going badly wrong. So I just don't think we should look at this, really.
I'll come to Councillor Brown. Do I see an indication from Councillor Breyer?
Yeah, agree. It just feels like mission creep to me. I think I'm against looking at the regulatory framework.
I do have views on this, but I think it's worth discussing. I think everything that falls within the boundaries of the committee model, which is regulatory committees, I think as well, is worth discussing. And I think the way that I foresee this group is, as we alluded to, it's going to continue. So I think it should be on the agenda. I think we should be talking about all of the committees.
No, thank you. I concur. I'll come to Councillor Self, then we're moving on.
So my own experience of public rights away and greens is it's working very well. You know, we don't have too many meetings. Public safety and protection is working well, and going to some of the planning committee meetings with some quite contentious issues, they seem to be working quite well. So I kind of agree that at the moment, maybe you should come to them sometime in the future for sure. But I think we've got enough on our plate at the moment.
Thank you very much. Excellent, that's everybody. We will move on to leadership. We raised a number of issues at the start of the meeting in respect of the role of vice chairs. Does anyone want to rule out looking at options as to, in terms of that role? Because this is, for what it's worth, this is the issue, as I say, that's been raised by all political groups, and almost everyone we've spoken to, and almost every consultation we've done with elected members has said there is a conflict here, and how we resolve it. Now, I appreciate Councillor Eddy made the point earlier that it's simply a case of clarifying the roles and insisting that vice chairs do it. I'm not sure that's going to work. I just don't think it will. I think if there are members of council who wish to pursue scrutiny as a formal opposition, I don't think telling them that they have to operate in a collegiate and collaborative manner will deliver that outcome. I'll come to Councillor Breyer, but I would be really keen to hear from the Labour group on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I've worked out in my head a fairly, what I hope is an elegant solution to this, that hopefully other members will think is a good solution. Vice chairs are, they have the same, in a sense, they have the same access, don't they, to the chair's briefings. So they go along to all those briefings. I don't think that should be removed. I do think that the emphasis of the vice chair role should be different. I think it should be something more akin to a scrutiny lead. I think if we have acknowledged that scrutiny and policy formation are sort of two sides of the same coin, for me, I don't think they should be necessarily separated out into two different sort of forms of committee, like an OSM and a policy committee format. I think they should all kind of be within the structure of the policy committee. And with that in mind, I think that if democratically speaking, a political group, and we're talking about a specific political group, wants to take a more oppositional role, I think it makes sense that if they are going to take the vice chair role, that it should be more of a scrutiny role, that they're basically still having the same access, but that we actually accentuate within the council structures that that's what it is. It's not a deputy role. It's not a deputising for the chair, because if it becomes that, you end up with an opposition, someone who is seeing themselves as an opposition councillor taking the role of a chair and doing things that are different to the way that sort of functionality has worked up to that point. I think it's far more elegant to then suggest that the chair themselves have a deputy, so that you have a deputy chair of the committee selected by the chair, and that scrutiny role, which stays the same. It still gets a special responsibility allowance, still has all the privileges of going to all of the meetings, still has all the same access, but is much more clearly defined as a scrutiny role. And I think that in itself is a good idea, because scrutiny is so important. If we don't acknowledge it within our structures, we will always have this question of, oh, well, let's put some scrutiny functionality in, which I don't think adds to effective decision making necessarily, because I think directly influencing the policy through scrutiny is the way that we should be thinking about this. So for me, that is a proposal that I put forward, but I think elegantly matches our political reality with the functionality of how the role is currently working and not working.
So for clarity, the proposal would be that each committee has a chair, in effect a vice chair with responsibility for scrutiny.
They could be called scrutiny lead. You could find a better name for it. I'm not sort of wedded to the name of the thing, but the idea being that person is given a role. They can be supportive of the chair if they want to be. That's not saying that they can't be. It's just that they're not explicitly expected to be supportive of, which is what our constitution currently says, and is not something that practically all of the vice chairs can live up to. They can't just always be supportive of the chair. I think that has to be acknowledged. Regardless, actually, of the political considerations at this moment, I think actually a second, a third party who wants to be seen as in opposition, that actually helps them. It gives them a sense of their status within the organisational structures of the council. And I think that's something we should be positive about. We should be positive about the idea of opposition.
So I welcome views from all parties on this. I do think Councillor Dudd has made a point that the Labour group has not been consulted about this, would wish to be consulted about this. I think that's a fair assumption to throw out there. I'm more than happy for that to happen and for Councillor Dudd to circulate views to this committee or come back, or I'm more than happy to do it at your discretion, both representatives on this committee.
Yeah, so I think fundamentally we probably agree the role could be better defined, although I think it probably is quite well defined, but people have got an impression of what the role is based on their sort of own biases. So you made the point that you're not expected to support the chair when other people think constitutionally you're obliged to support, but it's not the case. So there's a sort of a perception issue rather than, and maybe there are some constitutional issues as well. But yeah, we don't see the vice chair as a deputy for the chair. I think it's fair enough that as a chair you can deputise at the meeting and chair the meeting, because the chair's meant to independently conduct a meeting anyway. You're meant to do that fairly and do that in a balanced way, and I think that's what, like Richard, you did the other day. So you stood and chaired the meeting. We haven't got a problem with that. Yeah, we don't think the vice chair is there just to rubber stamp what the chair does. Also, then the vice chair doesn't get paid the same special responsibility allowance as the chair. That recognises there's a different level of responsibility, and I think that's right. That the chair is the political lead and has the responsibility to sign things off. Where there's a situation where the chair's not available, I mean, it's very rarely that a decision is that urgent. You can't get hold of the chair to agree something. I can't think of a scenario where that maybe when the chair is ill or something, incapacitated. I think there's potentially a situation where you could say the leader of the council, instead of the officers going to the vice chair, maybe they have to consult the leader of the council in that position where maybe a chair's incapacitated. But yeah, we see the position very differently to other people. And yeah, as you say, we see ourselves as the opposition in this organisation. We don't see ourselves as part of the administration, and sort of trying to shoehorn things into the constitution to try and change that isn't going to work, because whatever is put in the constitution, we're still going to take that stand that we're the opposition. So maybe what you've proposed has some merit, and say, well, I've not seen that proposed before, so we'll have to consult people on it. I don't know if Kaz has got anything to add on that. And sorry, Richard, I've only got your hand up.
No,
Just briefly, Kai, you're the most experienced person, so I'll take what you're saying. But it does seem a bit odd to me that in Transport Committee we've got a vice chair who's a Tory and a chair who's a Green, and politically they're diametrically opposite one another. So how that kind of works just seems very strange to me, and I think it needs a bit of discussion about the vice chair role, but we need to maybe take that to our own groups and think about it a bit more.
I'll come to Councillor Eddy and then sum up and put a proposal to the...
I fundamentally disagree with Rob's contention. When the Brass working group met, we wanted a system, and I believe we've achieved it, which was actually more open and transparent, but did not actually, by referring to policy committees, defer necessary and timely action, which in my view Bristolians will not thank us for or forgive, and rightly so. How that's worked out, and I can compare it with my time in almost the same brief as cabinet member for housing 19 years ago, and it's working out very effectively. I don't actually, I in fact use the expression, the following expression at Friday's policy committee. When I challenged one of Kai's colleagues, I said, well, I'm not in the administration, but I'm vice chairman of this committee. So I'm here to actually question things on behalf of Bristolians, of course, but not to actually stop the development policy, but to add to it. And I do think actually it's important. I mean, I would say I do wear various political hats. So I'm planning and licensing in HR as well. But I can fairly say time-wise, I'm busier now in local government terms than I've been since I've been a cabinet member. That reflects the duties, if they're taken seriously, being vice chair.
I have had feedback from a significant number of elected members saying that they've never been busier, and the level of work that I'm seeing does not seem consistent from committee to committee in terms of the roles of chairs and vice chairs, or even ordinary committee members, or even members who are chairing subcommittees or subgroups and all the rest of it. I think this is an area we need to look at very carefully. Welcome further discussion and further points from the Labour group. I think at its core, the discussion that we've had has focused on an inherent conflict, let's say, between the roles of shadow chair, let's say, and deputy chair that are encompassed in the role of vice chair. And though I don't think it's out of bounds to say that there was a certain tension baked into the system by the committee model working group. However, that does not seem to be working for everybody. And I think coming up with some options for that, I take Councillor Dudd's point on board. I will come to him momentarily, but just to make a point on it, I do think if there is it is for the Labour group to decide how it approaches governance of the city. And as I say, I think opposition is a perfectly legitimate, God knows, it exists in every council and in every institution of government that we've got in the country. If that's the direction of travel, I think the Labour group should be resourced and have the governance tools it needs to conduct that scrutiny and that opposition effectively. And I'm not sure that the vice chair's position is doing that for you. However, as I say, it's a question for you guys as well as for all the other councillors. So I'd look forward to hearing more, but I think it's an area that we will look up options on unless anyone disagrees fundamentally that this is an area that we should look at. Appreciating everything is subject to ongoing review. I don't think this is something that can wait a year. I think we need clarity about these roles. I don't want chairs to feel like they can't take a sick day because in effect they might be handing their committee over to someone who's in opposition, and I'm not sure that the Labour group is, apologies, I hope it doesn't come across as patronising or anything worse. I do think you need to be supported and resourced to fulfil the function of opposition if that's what you want to do. I don't see any other way of doing that other than through an overview and scrutiny management process. But as I say, options to come back.
Yeah, just on I mean, you raised the issue of like deputy chair. I think that's probably a little bit overkill because there weren't sort of deputy cabinet members and things like that. I think if a chair is incapacitated, then I think maybe the leader of the council steps in instead, because I just think it's just too many positions, to be honest with you. I don't think you need if that's the direction of travel, then I don't think you need a deputy chair.
Thank you. I'll come to Lisa, then Rob.
Yeah, I was just about to say exactly the same thing, Councillor Dudd. You know, with the conversation that we're doing, you can put him, because at the end of the day, the chair could actually just nominate to deputise them, okay, in any positions if they're incapacitated from the committee, so they can nominate they can nominate somebody to chair that meeting, for example, from the committee. Yeah, so. Yeah, if they have an emergency or somebody else can nominate somebody, but they could also nominate in an emergency. So the deputised role could actually be omitted from this situation. However, there should be a second person, you know, in that committee, especially where papers are concerned or conversation, because, you know, and there should be some, probably like what Councillor Breyer was saying, somebody who's maybe in that scrutinising position, but not, because at the end of the day, it is about trying to create some kind of like consensus, and consensus comes through conversation, and it comes through argument. Conversation, you know, provides a consensus, and with those two people in that room looking over those papers, you're actually scrutinising between yourselves to create a consensus where you're having the political direction from the chair. So you can remove the role, but we still need somebody there to actually provide that conversation to create consensus.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. Councillor Breyer. Fantastic, thank you. I'm trying to think if there is any consensus or basis on which to proceed. I feel like there are arguments both for moving forwards and ruling this up.
We've not had any
now.
papers about this at all. We've not consulted with our group, but I'm not closing it down. We'll have to talk to our group about what's come up today.
Thank you very much. In respect to the last few things on the agenda, appreciating that the meeting has now come to its scheduled closing time, I'm proposing that we extend time for 5 to 10 minutes. I'm just going to run through the other things that came up at the start of the meeting, and I would like to just get a show of hands from anyone who wants to rule it out as something that we look at. Does that make sense in terms of So the things that you said you would like to focus on at the start of the meeting, I'm just going to go through those and see if there's anything on that list that you want to go, no.
So if we've run out of time, we wanted to discuss the deputy leader position.
Me too.
But if we've run out of time, as long as it comes back at the next meeting, and maybe we put a bit more time in the diary at the next meeting, I'm happy to leave it.
I think amending the agenda for the next meeting, but also giving ourselves time to produce some information on it, to look at leader and deputy leader of council, I think would be a perfectly reasonable suggestion. Does anyone wish to speak against? Done. And that includes that, so that deals with the issue around terms. And
Actually, I wanted to bring up public forum, remember? The hour, how can we actually create a half hour to an hour public forum?
So, hang on, before anyone comes in, so, role of the Lord Mayor could also be added to the next Leader of Council and would also give us time to look at. I suspect these will lead to either minor proposals and tweaks or no further action. I suspect, but let's give it the air of possibility, unless anyone firmly objects.
The risk of actually being pedantic, we have the terms of reference given us by full council. That doesn't include to look at the role of Lord Mayor.
Apologies, that anything pertaining to public forum and all decisions pertaining to public forum for full council sit with the, unless I'm wrong, with the Lord Mayor. And with each chair of each policy committee, as Councillor Stone said, that public forum is something that's scheduled to look at in the future. I think we'll probably best to look at the role of Lord Mayor in that context at that meeting, but good to have the steer and to be able to prepare well. Is there anything else in terms of leadership that we want to prepare papers on for March? Cool. Thank you. Apologies. Appreciate this has been a bit of a speed up, slow down, quickly, not now kind of a meeting. And I do very much appreciate the point that we are trying to do an awful lot of work in a very, very limited time span. I thank all members of this committee. I would also really encourage members to share agenda items that they think will be particularly contentious, or proposals as far in advance as possible. I'll come to Councillor Breyer for one final point.
I was just wondering whether we were going to discuss agenda item 7. Because it's the stakeholder feedback that I think is quite important to talk about.
Yes, no, I concur. But I also think, and I would, on that note, particularly like to thank the officers, and in particular Taylor, who has been working to consolidate all of the feedback for this committee and the previous committee into an accessible resource that will be shared very, very shortly. And yes, it's something we could discuss specifically in the next meeting, but also which I think should be informing all of the work of this working group moving forwards. The phenomenal work was done by the communities team for Committee Model Working Group, and I'm sure we've all had plenty of representations from the public, as well as what's been coming in through public forum and through other sources. So making sure that we are genuinely listening on all of those fronts is going to be really, really key. On that point, I will allow everyone to leave and go and get some lunch. Thank you all ever so much for your patience. See you all soon. Cheers.